So let's start with the other Rebecca, seeing that you posted a few questions on the RSVP form in terms of finding work and which cities we prefer and all those things. So do you maybe want to start off just throwing your questions to the group?
Sure. Sorry, I actually can't remember what I submitted.
Do you want me to read it?
Please, I've been doing so many master's interviews at the moment. My brain is actual mush.
Okay, no problem.
Cool.
So the first part of your question was, could you guys speak to your process of finding work in the Netherlands? And then you explain that you're moving across in January and you're trying to find out how to approach finding work. It seems like there's a lot of internships available for current master students, but not as much for recent graduates. Okay, so that's the first part. Michael and Azraa, I think you guys are more equipped to answer that question in terms of finding work and work versus internships in the Netherlands specifically.
Well, I don't know. I don't really know exactly what people wanna know. I mean, these specific questions are great, but should we maybe start with visas? Is that something people want to know about?
True. Because the visas are connected to the work as well.
Exactly.
So maybe you can explain the visa that you came with.
Yeah, so I came on what's called the Zoekjaar visa, which is called a search year. And that is a special visa for people that have graduated with a master's or a PhD from one of the top 200 universities in the world. And there's a list that comes out. And at the time, UCT was on that list. It has been on the list for years. And unfortunately, this year, it dropped off that list. So if you graduated from UCT this year with a master's, you won't be eligible. But you are eligible if you graduated from UCT within the last 3 years. So from the year you graduate, you have 3 years afterwards to apply for the Zoekjaar visa. And essentially, as long as you have the master's or PhD, they really don't ask any questions, you get a visa. So you get this 1 year, it's search visa, and you can basically come to the Netherlands and look for a job while you're here. And the advantage of that is that you can actually meet companies, and it's a lot easier for a company to employ you when they know that you're actually coming into the country and they know that you're committed. So that's a big help. It's not impossible to find a job without that visa, but it's a lot more difficult, and the minimum salary requirements also change. If you guys want to hear about that, we can also talk about that. So essentially, you get this 1 year search year, and within that year, you have to find a job at a company that is registered to be a sponsor. Then your company sponsors your visa, and that is called a knowledge migrant visa. And that's the visa that I'm on and Michael's on, although he came into it a little bit differently because he studied here, but he can talk about that. And essentially, if you don't have one of those visas, you can't work here unless you have some other kind of visa. You have a Dutch passport or a European passport. So that's how, that was my route into the Netherlands.
Yeah, just to add to that, essentially, the visa that you have is really important in terms of the type of work you can do and what kind of supports you have in the Netherlands from the government, etc. And for instance, taxes, etc., etc., etc. And the knowledge migrant one is the one that, as Azraa said, that we both on at the moment, and there's a minimum salary associated to that, and that also depends on your age. But you've basically, Azraa has basically covered most of the things. I studied here, so I could apply to the searcher visa, which I then used to find a job and then work for a while for a lower salary, and then I moved on to the other visa and started earning a little bit more. So
the advantage of a searcher visa as opposed to coming straight in on the knowledge migrant visa, which is possible, is that the minimum salary that you have to earn as a knowledge migrant is usually not the salary you're going to get as a recent graduate. It would be extremely difficult to get a company to pay you the amount of money as a recent graduate in architecture or urban design or planning. But if you come in with the searcher visa, that minimum salary that you have to earn is less. And it is very attainable to get a job.
So
Sorry, Michael?
You can be an intern, so there's not necessarily a specification as to your income. Yeah.
And is it connected to your employer, or is it a general thing?
The general visa, which so you can also, for instance, the knowledge migrant visa is very much attached to your job, and it also, because of that, there's if your contract comes to an end, it also, your visa also comes to an end. So it's important to also think about these things when you're moving here and working here.
And Azraa, you mentioned something about a company has to be registered as a sponsor. Are most companies registered for that, or was it difficult to find?
So most companies are registered as a sponsor. Essentially what they're trying to prevent is you coming here on a searcher visa and then working as a waitress or something that isn't in the knowledge migrant field. So you can do that while you're on your search here, but for example, working at a bar or being a waitress, that kind of company wouldn't be able to sponsor you a knowledge migrant visa. And there's a list online, you can find it, of all the companies that sponsor visas. I mean, most architecture, urban design companies are sponsors.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's not too hard for a company to become a sponsor. It costs them a little bit of money up front, approximately 2,000 euros. And then they need to register essentially, but the process takes probably about a month or two for them to register. But obviously it's a lot of hassle for them, and it's them going out on a limb for you. And it's mostly small companies that won't have a sponsorship. Most large companies already have this because it's fairly typical of them to employ internationals. So yeah.
And you can bring your partner with you on a sponsor visa, on a knowledge migrant visa. You can sponsor your partner to come as well.
Yes, but then the employer has to apply for that as well, right?
I'm not sure.
Because I actually did research on that, and it seemed like you cannot, as an individual, apply for a partnership visa through the knowledge migrant visa. It has to be done through the employer that's responsible for the contract. But it is doable. Yeah.
Yeah. So Rebecca, who asked the question, I'm not sure what kind of visa you'll be on. Just to answer your question properly.
So my partner has a highly skilled migrant visa, I think it's called. So he works for a big international manufacturing company in South Africa and is being transferred there. And so I think, from what I understand, I will get the same visa through him we'll be married by the end of the year. So through that process. Yeah. So I don't know if that's different from the knowledge migrant
it's the same visa.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
No, so you'll get a partner visa, not a migrant visa.
Yes, yeah.
So, but what's nice with the partner visa is essentially you have a lot more freedom as to what you can do in the Netherlands. So your visa is not attached to your job. So for instance, the salary specifications were only for that visa, which will not apply to you, for instance.
Okay, great. That's good information to know. Thanks.
All this information as well you can find on the IND website.
Mm-hmm.
And also they're super responsive. You can contact them on Twitter or email them. They're very good at kind of engaging you. And, yeah.
Amazing. Cool.
Yeah, and I think the partnership thing also allows you to possibly work as a waitress then, I guess. I mean, it's not it's
you
not
can do
attached
anything.
to, yeah.
You can even start your own company. You can be a consultant. You have a lot more freedom. I sometimes wish I was on a partner visa.
And so both of you guys spent time searching for work. Maybe you could give some insights as to how long that took, how difficult it was with this visa specifically.
Yeah. Azraa?
Okay, I'll go first. I started applying for jobs in the Netherlands about a month before I arrived. I maybe applied at about 30 companies. I got 1.5 responses. And luckily, the one response turned into a job. So I came here without a job. I had an interview via Skype before I arrived, and they said, yeah, come and meet us and we'll talk about a potential job. So I basically came here blind, took a bit of a risk. I told myself I'll give myself 3 months. If I don't find any work, I'll come home. And luckily, I got a job within 4 days of arriving in the Netherlands. So my experience was quite seamless. I know some people really, really do struggle, especially people who are not in architecture or urban design. Planning is a whole different ball game. It's extremely difficult, and I'm sure Janine can tell you more about that because she experienced that. So I somehow got lucky, got a job. There's plenty of work in architecture and urban design. Planning is a bit different.
Perhaps to add, I mean, my experiences was in a way quite similar to Azraa's. I was fortunate enough to already be in the Netherlands. Hello, Sean.
Hello, everyone.
So yeah, I was already here. It was quite I also I contacted a lot of companies. Very few of them replied, and in the end it was 1 or 2 of them that replied, but in the end reached out and I got a job with them. I think what is interesting to understand is also speaking Dutch also makes a massive difference in your ability to get a job, retain a job, and kind of what you can do. So yes, your experience is incredibly important, but I've found that being able to speak Dutch is almost one of the most important things you can do. Although most to all the work I engage with is anyway, the medium of the office is English. It's just a benefit, so the companies see it as a benefit. Yeah.
So can you speak Dutch?
I'm trying.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I experienced the same thing in 2 ways. I think in the first way, I did the same thing that Azraa did the last time I tried to work here, which was about 4 years ago. And I emailed about 60 companies. I think I got 2 responses. But then when I actually got here, I became a bit more aggressive in my emails and said, you know, I am here and I can meet immediately, and people were responding a bit more. So I think from my perspective, it's not that useful necessarily always to pre-apply or search, but rather to say, you know, I'm here, let's meet, can I come to your office and chat? And then secondly, definitely the ability to speak, or at least just understand. For me, it helped to say that I'm Afrikaans and I can actually really read all the documents and all the policies and understand those things, it does help. But it's not, I mean, it's not like an official thing, right? Most of the time. So, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing to add on the knowing Dutch, if you don't know Dutch, you almost definitely will have to work in an international office. And there are plenty of international offices. Almost all of them are in Rotterdam. So all the OMAs, MVRDVs, my company, Michael's company, there are plenty of them around. This is specifically for architecture and urban design. Planning, I think, is a lot more in Dutch. And there are a lot less international planning companies because it's so deeply embedded in policy, and that's obviously in Dutch.
Yeah, so Rebecca, I can't remember if you said you are an architect or a planner specifically, but specifically for planners, sorry, yeah?
No, I was just going to say, it seems like I've taken the same path as all of you. So I did an undergrad in architecture at UCT, and I'm now doing planning.
Okay, yes. Thanks for the reminder. So planning is more difficult here because it's not something that happens privately as much as it does in South Africa. It's more, you would work for the municipality or you would work in policy, and a lot of architects and urban designers end up doing the planning work that we would have been doing in South Africa. And I think Azraa and Michael, you guys could maybe also just, confirm that, because I haven't worked in an office in a while here. But that is something to consider when thinking about where you want to work and what kind of work you want to do and what kind of skills you want to bring to the table. A lot of places asked me, okay, cool, you're a planner, but can you do urban design? And then I just, said no, because I don't necessarily have that degree. So it is a combination that's more common here than we would expect in South Africa.
Yeah, I think also to also say that there's less of a distinction between urban design and planning in the Netherlands, because they understand it as one thing, which is urbanism. So yeah.
Exactly. And then I think another question that relates to that, Rebecca, you asked about internships. So Azraa and Michael, how do you guys find that, maybe through other people in your offices, or, how open are they to that? And especially in terms of international internships, because I think what I've experienced is that a lot of the internship opportunities are specifically for locals. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at my office, we do have a lot of interns. And I know a lot of people who have done internships or are doing internships. But it also must be said that not all companies kind of upgrade an internship into a proper contract later on. And knowing that going in, you need to be mindful of that, because also internships usually pay bare minimum. You can hardly rent an apartment on an internship. You can hardly do your groceries on an internship. So you'll need cash in the bank as well to do it. Yeah, and you need to kind of have this idea of whether the company that you end up working for, if your intention is to carry on working here, is going to commit to you in a way and will upgrade you to a more substantial contract in the future.
Yeah, if I may add to that, usually planning internships are either for, you have to be registered as a student. That is to protect people from being hired as interns when they are actually qualified. Not to say that it doesn't happen. You can get an internship if you do already have your master's degree in your field. A lot of the time, internships are paid for by a university of a specific country. So you might see an internship that says must be a German student or something. And that means that the German government is paying your company that you're applying at for you to intern with them. So that also excludes a lot of internships from the ones that you might be applying at. I do know someone in architecture who does have an internship, South African. She came on the Zukia visa, not being paid very well, and living in Amsterdam. And again, with no intention that that company will give her a contract. And I have heard that this happens quite often. Companies do take advantage, so do your research, and yeah, make sure that it's something that you really want to do. Also, with if you want to do an internship in straight planning, it might be useful to apply to internships that are kind of planning adjacent. So like sustainability companies or something like that, because I think it will be very difficult to get a straight planning internship.
Yeah, there's very few offices that just do planning work. So you have to be creative when you start looking. Is there any specific other questions relating to looking for work and visas and internships and this kind of topic before we maybe move to more fun things?
Oh, sorry, I have a question. I might have left just to get a burger and then came back. Did anyone discuss like language barrier, advantages, disadvantages, bad at Afrikaans, good at Russian? Is that good? Is that bad? Asking for a friend.
Yeah, I mean, we did touch on it in the sense that speaking Dutch allows you to work much better in the Netherlands. However, also if you're speaking other languages, it's a definite like plus, because there's a lot of, for instance, probably if you're working at an international company, if you know French, they're going to put you on French projects. If you know Italian, they will put you on Italian projects. If you know Chinese, you're going to be on Chinese projects. So they do things like that. But at the end of the day, the medium is English. So everyone can speak English. It's how we all communicate.
Yeah, I think it can actually sometimes be a bit misleading almost, because literally everyone can speak pretty fluent English, and everyone operates in English quite seamlessly. But it's a subtle thing in terms of the advantage that understanding and speaking Dutch will give you. And I think Afrikaans, it helps, but it's not necessarily a beneficial somehow.
Yeah.
It actually could be a bit of a setback in some ways, because people who learn Dutch from fresh, they actually pick it up quicker than some Afrikaans people.
Yeah. What I found is Afrikaans, you immediately step in and you kind of understand the gist of everything going on, but then you quickly learn that there's almost a glass ceiling that you have to almost unlearn your Afrikaans to learn Dutch. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah. But I think professionally, people wouldn't necessarily say it's a requirement, but often in an interview, it ends up becoming something that they will ask, and that will really help.
You're also kind of competing with people. I mean, every European knows at least 3 languages. So knowing any other language is a massive advantage, including Russian, because a lot of international offices here do projects in Russia. I mean, my office has two offices in Russia, for example. So we have a lot of Russian people in our office, and I think a lot of these big international offices do the same.
Azraa, I actually worked with the office in St. Petersburg. So
okay, MLA Plus.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance to go there, you should definitely take it.
I will definitely do that.
Nice. So Jonathan and Sean Mayer, you guys joined a bit late. Do you maybe just want to introduce yourselves and tell us if you have any specific questions? Jonathan, do you maybe want to go first?
Well, hi everyone, I'm Jonathan. I studied architecture quite a while ago. Know a few of you guys. Hi everyone. I don't have any questions. I'm just interested in potentially working in the Netherlands at some point. So I thought it would be cool to just come and listen. So no questions from me. I'll just be listening in the background. Thanks.
Cool, thanks for joining. Sean Mayer, the third Sean in our discussion.
Hello. So I studied architecture masters, and I'm just kind of listening in. So no
Okay,
specific
cool.
questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I have a question. Just
Yes,
quick.
please go for it.
I wonder if any of you guys can speak to this, but I have a background in engineering, but I really wanted to use this master's to pivot into more of the design space, urban design and sustainable cities space. And I was wondering if you have any advice about where I should be kind of looking. So I'm moving to the Netherlands after this master's. And I wonder if you have any advice on where to start the process, what it's like for someone who maybe doesn't have that background.
I think what's quite amazing about the Netherlands is Azraa and I work in very kind of traditional urban offices, which do very kind of traditional work in a sense. But there are a lot of companies here that are doing work in between the lines where they're focusing on sustainability or other kind of focuses. And obviously to find these companies, you have to do a bit of research. But there's a lot of opportunities, and there are companies looking for people with different forms of experience. Yeah, I don't know. Azraa?
Thanks, Michael.
Oh, that's a bit difficult. I guess if you wanted to go into the design space fully, the best would be to do a design conversion course of some kind. But if you just want to use what you have now, so engineering with, if there is some sustainability in your course, there's so much opportunity for that. Yeah. I mean, the opportunities are really endless here. The companies that exist here are unlike anything there is in South Africa. There are loads of companies that only consult on how to make cities more sustainable, and these are very viable companies who employ lots of people, and that's a space you could go into if you didn't want to do a whole nother study in design, for example.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there's also a lot of quite small companies that do very interesting work and are in the architectural and design space, but they work a lot more as consultants in a way. So maybe they give advice on design, but they are not necessarily themselves. So there is that space as well, which is quite interesting.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
I've actually just, sorry.
Oh, no, continue.
No, I just quickly want to say, I just copied a link into the chat of a company that I know of specifically that is basically, it's quite a small company, but they work a lot with international engineers, and it's very much focused on circular urbanism. They do a lot of testing and a lot of experimenting, and the company changes quite a lot in terms of who joins and who leaves. So it's almost like a bit of a platform, but it might be a good option for you to get in touch with them they have positions opening up all the time. So yeah, something similar to that.
Thanks so much. I actually applied for this company last week, so.
Are you serious?
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice.
Thanks so much.
Okay, well, good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's also circular, I think, what's it called? Circular city. There's a lot of like urban metabolism stuff going on in the Netherlands. And as somebody, I myself work in the sustainable cities space, and we really need more engineers who are able to transfer between the spaces, because a lot of people, so I come out of urban planning and try like support cities to design infrastructure projects, but there's only so much I can do and my skill set stops. And then we have to like outsource to engineers who are able to do the technical and financial feasibility studies, but in a new and different way, not in business as usual. So I think just hold on to the fact that you're an engineer that's passionate about that space, and you'll work your way into the kind of projects you want to be involved in. Hopefully, if you're in the right organization that allows you to do that. But I think we need more engineers and fewer environmentalists overall, which is maybe rude to say.
Okay, great. That makes me feel a lot better. Thank you.
Okay, Rebecca, you also had a question about the cities in terms of Amsterdam versus Rotterdam, which is, I guess, a classic question that people ask. I personally have lived in both, but I think I would first open it up to Michael and Azraa just to give their perspective on living in Rotterdam. I think most people... Should I go first?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit biased.
Okay, well, I can just explain from my own perspective that when I moved here, initially, the last time that I spoke about, 4 years ago, the dream was to live in Amsterdam, right? But all the work was in Rotterdam. So I went to Rotterdam and I ended up getting a short job there for about 2 months. And I became obsessed with the city. Like it's nothing that any image or photograph or film can prepare you for. It's such a crazy place. And eventually I ended up getting a job in Amsterdam, and I had to travel there a lot, and I almost resented going there. And then eventually also moved to Amsterdam, and it's a completely different place, even though it's in the same country. It's very difficult to compare, but I definitely personally prefer Rotterdam because of the environment that challenges you. Everywhere you look, there's some interesting building or something that completely challenges your perspective on how a city can look or feel or operate, where Amsterdam is very traditional and, you know, obviously beautiful and historic, but also very crowded and more expensive. But it also has a lot of opportunities. So it's both quite close to each other as well, which makes it feasible to travel between the two, which I think a lot of people do.
And how would you find Haarlem?
Haarlem is like a tiny version of Amsterdam, where people move when they have babies. It's like a village. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect before I came, but I like it. It doesn't have the same urbanist appeal, I guess, as Rotterdam, but I try and go there to stimulate myself every now and then on that level. Haarlem is more of a village that you would find as a catalog almost for smaller towns in the Netherlands. But sorry, before I just hand it over to you guys, the nice thing about Haarlem is if you do work in Amsterdam and you can't afford to live in Amsterdam because it's super expensive to live there, Haarlem is a really good alternative because it's like 10-20 minutes by train to Amsterdam. So it's quite beneficial in that way. So Michael, what's your experience?
my experience is Rotterdam's the best. But for me, Amsterdam is an amazing place. And as Janine said, it's a little bit hard to compare them because Amsterdam is this, you kind of fall out the plane into this historic space and everything's tight and everything's beautiful and everything's like what you want as like your vision of what an urbanist kind of environment should be. And it's really beautiful. But with that, it's also a tourist hub. So it's kind of like living in Venice, right? So what happens is you don't end up living in Amsterdam, you end up living outside the kind of rings of Amsterdam, which is equally nice. There's beautiful parks and there's wonderful kind of areas around that space. But I think when people say moving to Amsterdam, they don't really understand that they won't be in like those spaces. And as Janine also said, it's really the cost comparative between living in Amsterdam and anywhere else really is a big one. And to put it into perspective as well, Rotterdam is a 45-minute train ride or even 30-minute train ride from Amsterdam. So it's super quick to commute, really easy. But at the end of the day, for me, Rotterdam is much better. I couldn't be more central, and I think I pay an average salary, an average rental for the Netherlands. And yeah, I love the Rotterdam's really kind of, it's got an interesting history because it was bombed both by the Allies and the Nazis, so it was completely flattened. And whereas Amsterdam has this historic core, everything in the center of Rotterdam is new. So there's this new build, this kind of new feeling of kind of what a modern European city looks like. And it's one of the few cities in Europe that actually has that identity. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I think that identity is still so strong though, because they still have this approach to reinventing themselves instead of, they could have so easily after the bombing said, let's try and recreate everything the way it was, but they didn't do that. And for me, that sense of just being bold about change and thinking differently about the city is still something that you can feel when you're there. Azraa, do you agree?
Yeah, I think you guys summed it up really well. The thing I might add is that Rotterdam is unlike any other city in the Netherlands, not only by what it looks like, but also the people. So Rotterdam has 50% of the population is Moroccan or Turkish, and that is very unique for the Netherlands. So there's a much bigger diversity of people, diversity of food, although we're talking about food in the Netherlands is a whole nother story. Whereas every other city in the Netherlands is quite like posh and a bit homogenous. Rotterdam's a bit gritty, a bit dirty, a bit ugly, a bit rough around the edges.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite a unique place.
Yeah. The typical kind of Rotterdammer kind of says, wij is echt, which means we are real, and it's kind of a chip at how people from Amsterdam and other parts of the country aren't authentic in like the way they talk and the way they are and act.
Yeah, that rivalry is quite real, hey?
It's like a Cape Town Joburg rivalry where Rotterdam is Joburg and Amsterdam is Cape Town.
Exactly. It's like, it feels like every country has that almost. But it's quite unique.
I think maybe just to add is, coming from South Africa, you have this kind of spatial dimension of everything being very far away. And for you, it's not that far, but when you get here, you realize how small the Netherlands is and how close everything actually is. And even though something is half an hour down the road or by train, you know, I end up spending my life in a very kind of small area if I actually look at where I need to be and what I need to do. My actual footprint is incredibly small because I only use a bike. Everyone I kind of engage with, I can get my bike and engage, you know, so that's my life. I don't need a car. And yeah, and I much prefer it.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of things like that in terms of lifestyle, which it's quite a big paradigm shift when you get here. But some of it is very beneficial and some of it is quite challenging. And I think that some of the challenging things for me is, you know, especially coming from South Africa, is that like lack of organic diversity and that roughness almost that you were talking about. And maybe that's why we, all three of us, like Rotterdam more. But maybe you guys, I don't know if someone has specific questions around that, but maybe you guys can talk about just the general lifestyle things, because I think also maybe just the fact that, you know, how is it to interact with the locals and reading the newspapers, just the general sense of living here. Do you guys find it quite adaptable, or was it challenging at the beginning? Azraa?
Yeah, I can start. So I feel like I've definitely fallen into a bit of a expat trap where there are so many South Africans here that I knew before I came, that was kind of the circle of friends that I fell into. Luckily, most of them have European partners and some Dutch partners, so branching out a little bit. I personally not found it very easy to make friends with Dutch people, and I found that a lot of expats have the same experience, including Europeans from other countries. I have one real Dutch friend that I would actually hang out with, but making friends is really not difficult. I've made a lot of friends through work, and more just keep coming from South Africa. So yeah, I mean, I wish I could branch out a bit more, but obviously with COVID, that's not a help. And I do feel like the language barrier is sometimes an issue, especially if you want to make friends with a group of Dutch people. They all speaking Dutch. They might start out in English, but then will trail off in Dutch. So language barrier can sometimes be a little bit difficult.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough to study it, which meant also that I have quite a lot of people that I know in the Netherlands. But I would say, and they all from different countries, you know, sort of Italy, wherever, and a lot of people have stayed to continue working, and it has kind of meant that I almost feel like I know more people here than I know in South Africa. But I would also mirror kind of what Azraa said. It is very difficult to kind of build friends or communities of Dutch people in your life, because there is this kind of stark difference between, yeah, it's easier to fall into the expat life because everyone's a bit foreign and everyone's in the same boat.
And everyone's speaking English.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess the clickiness we're all used to coming from Cape Town, right? But but I think the expat aspect makes it interesting, and I think for most of us, actually, most of your friends become people who are not actually locals. But that has a nice element to it as well. But I think also just in terms of lifestyle and inspiration for me personally when walking around and cycling around. There's a sense of aspiration and ability to feel like it's possible to be innovative and really live out those urban fantasies, I guess, that we all have. And it really affects the way that you work and the way that you think and the way that you approach your work. So for me personally, that's one of the biggest benefits actually of being here. I don't know if you guys feel the same about that.
Yeah, I can definitely echo that. I mean, when I arrived, and I mean, this is kind of a blend of my work and people's mindsets here and how different it is from South Africa. But I remember when I started working at this company, and the things they would propose in design, I thought was like totally undoable, totally irrational. How could you ever afford that? How could you ever do that? Why would you ever do that? I mean, they would tunnel a road for 25 kilometers just to get additional city land or connect one part of the city to the other. And when I started here, I was like, that blew my mind, because in South Africa, it's so unbelievably conservative. You would never even imagine proposing something like this. But yeah, I mean, the possibilities are endless. If you want to sink a road for 25 kilometers, you absolutely can. And like, money is almost no issue, and imagination is no issue, and innovation is no issue. So it's really changed the way that I work, and the possibilities that I really never thought of before in urban design, but also in just jobs and what people are doing. And yeah, it permeates almost everything. Yeah, so that's really changed my mindset a lot.
Yeah. In a way, I would definitely agree with Azraa. You know, I, having worked in South Africa for a while and then having worked here, I always felt very kind of limited in South Africa, as if like, you know, oh no, we can't do that. That's too radical. You shouldn't think that way. It's a, you know, nice try, but we need to tone it down a little bit. Let's only have like 3 houses with a huge garden. Whereas here, you know, I find that the way I work and what I do has completely changed, and that has both been influenced by kind of the cities that you're engaging with, but also kind of the work mindsets, and everyone's kind of trying to understand. Everyone's very pro city, so even if you're engaging with residents and governments and things like that, everyone's kind of like, oh, that's, you know, this is a really cool idea. How do we make it work? Which is sometimes a question that I found very hard to find in South Africa, where everyone's like, okay, well, that's really interesting, and you know, what's the problem?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest aha or like amazing moments that I experienced was when I went onto the City of Amsterdam's website and I found like literally any kind of spatial data that you can imagine, and it's open to anyone. So there's a really big sense of transparency in terms of data and communication, and when you get that from, you know, a government, it really changes people's attitude. But yeah, I think there's a different approach in that sense, which is quite what's the word, encouraging. Something that we're not used to.
Yeah, it's motivating in a lot of ways.
Okay, is there any other questions from people on the floor?
Can I ask, with regards to your working environment, how has it been different working in a company in the Netherlands versus in South Africa in terms of teams, dynamics, engaging as this holistic lifestyle? Yeah, I don't know if that's a question or a statement, but yeah.
Well, the only thing I can add to that is that everyone has lunch together every single day, but that was just at the place I worked. It was very interesting for me. But yeah, Azraa, maybe you and Michael can give further
Yeah,
input on that.
I mean, it's totally different. I mean, I work in a big international company, which would be very different from someone who's working in a smaller company. But I have about 60 people in my office. We have 19 nationalities. Been working with people from countries all over the world. So it's super fascinating. I'm learning so much about how to work with different people, working in different languages, totally different ways of thinking, which is sometimes very difficult because you have totally different understandings of the same thing. You start to realize how much culture has to do with the way you work and the way you understand things.
And the way you act.
For example, sorry?
And the way you act.
And the way you act, yes. So it's been a totally different learning curve because when you're working in South Africa, you're usually working with a bunch of South Africans. You all think the same way. Mostly you work the same way. And you have to learn totally new skill sets when working with people from different countries. I mean, when I work in the Chinese team, it's totally different from when I work in the British team, totally different from when I work in the Russian team. And I get moved between these different teams all the time. So that's an amazing skill that I would never have been able to learn in South Africa. And then also the different kinds of projects that I'm able to do in these different teams is, yeah, something, experience that I wouldn't be able to get in South Africa. So challenging, but very useful. Mike?
Yeah, I think it also largely depends on kind of how you end up, your position in the company and your role in the company and how you end up working. I would say my experience is quite similar to Azraa's, just the only difference really being that although my office also has all these teams of like, that are very often kind of country specific, so you will have like the French team and the Russian team or whatever. And then our office also people jump around a lot, but I've had my experience has very much been that I've stayed in one team for most of the time, and that's like my kind of unit, and we predominantly work on Dutch projects, and which has been also really nice. But I think what I can add is that working in this environment of internationals, you also, at least with my office, a lot of them are our age, reasonably young professionals. So your colleagues end up being your friends as well. And you kind of build kind of work. I found that working year workers almost become also a bit of a lifestyle thing where, you know, you make really good friendships, you meet really fantastic people, and at the same time, kind of your after hours, it's very easy to like commute, and yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know how.
Great.
That's kind of where the bottle idea comes from, correct?
Yeah.
Thanks so much,
Afterwards,
Azraa and Michael.
Yeah, I think it very much depends on the kind of office you work in, but there's definitely a more cultural mix in the offices, which is challenging but nice, as you say, Azraa.
Yeah, one other thing I should probably add is that if you are working in an international office, a big one like mine or Michael's, what I don't get working in an office like this, which I did get working in South Africa, is that I personally have a lot less interaction with the client, because if I'm working on a project in a specific country, the people from that country would be the one in contact with the client and all the other sub-consultants. For example, if it's a project in China, my Chinese colleagues would do all of the communication with external parties. So you gain some things, but you also lose other things, and it's just totally different from an experience in South Africa. So that's also some things to think about, because I know some people at my office, that really wasn't for them. They really wanted to be part of the entire process, in consultation with the client, going to builds if it's for architecture, and you don't always get that if you don't speak the language. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. And for instance, my experience has very much been my role as a designer, and I get thrown problems, and then I resolve those problems. But that is very, I also exist in this kind of, I don't know, in the office, you know, I don't really engage with clients and other people. There's mediators that do that. So I present and do all my work to, let's say, a team leader or someone else that would be engaging in a project, and then they would take that work and engage the clients and then come back. So there's also this kind of middleman or kind of way of working. Yeah.
I must say that.
Sorry, Janine.
Sorry, no.
Would you say that companies are quite hierarchical and like stick to that kind of way of working?
Mine is not, but mine has a very low glass ceiling. So mine's incredibly flat, and everyone very fluid and with what they do, and there's very little hierarchy. But then, so you have everyone, and then management, and then directors, and it's like the glass ceiling is there. You can't. Everyone exists in the same space. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's certain elements of, that hierarchy thing is quite an international standard thing almost. But something that I do find different here is, and I don't know if you guys also experience it, but I remember specifically I went to a meeting and my colleague next to me said, listen, that guy over there sitting there, he's like one of the richest people in the country, and his jacket was literally torn, and he arrived on a bicycle that was falling apart. So it's the status thing is maybe a little bit different in terms of your hierarchy and the way that you show your hierarchy, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't tell who's rich and who's poor. Everyone looks the same.
Yeah. But I also wanted to add to something that Michael was talking about and Azraa about working internationally. And what was funny is I actually ended up on a project that was based in South Africa, and then they give you a lot of responsibility because then you become the contact person and, you know, the main liaison with the client. So it's interesting, you know, from that perspective, where you could easily be like lower in the food chain of the project, but when it's in a context that's relevant to your background, then they actually give you quite a lot of responsibility.
Thanks, Janine.
Cool. Okay, is there any other questions going around?
I'd like to ask a question, but maybe it's too early to say because I know that you guys have only been there for like a year or two. Well, Michael's been there longer, but are you wanting to come back to South Africa at some point? And if so, like, what would you bring back from your experience that you feel would like add to your ability to? I don't know. I feel like as South Africans, so many of us have this like ingrained like desire to make change or something in the world. I don't know where it comes from. And often it kind of leads us back to working in South Africa, you know, 10, 15 years down the line. So what did you bring back?
I think that's quite a nice question, Rebecca. Maybe a nice question to end off with. Michael, do you want to go first?
That's a hard question there.
I know.
listen, my intention was always to come back, and in a way, I've now delayed that by working here because the opportunity presented itself. And I don't know when or how I will come back. It's my future plans aren't very solid, but I would obviously love to work in South Africa, and in what capacity, I don't know really, but sure, I can definitely say that working here has made a massive difference in how I work, why I work, and the way I design and engage with kind of people in the way I do things. As well as also just from a lifestyle perspective, it's also made a massive difference in terms of my life. And I think also the expectations that I have in terms of what cities should be like, I have has very much been informed from my experience of being generally abroad, because I would almost say this is one of the most important things we as spatial practitioners kind of should have, is a wider reference of what it's like to perhaps live and experience different places. Because I do find that sometimes when you're working, for instance, in South Africa or things like that, in these kind of closed areas, the dialogue becomes very monotonous, and it's very like everyone's agreeing to an idea that perhaps is not right, and it's because nothing else has been put onto the table. And having had a wider exposure to the world, you might have a broader frame of reference as to knowing what's possible. Yeah, I don't know.
Broadening your perspective always helps. Yeah. Azraa, how do you feel?
Yeah, I think Michael summed it up quite nicely, but I think what I might add to that is just a broader way of working, and understanding that the possibilities are so much wider than I used to believe in when I was working in South Africa, and just seeing what's possible and what things could be if people engaged and trusted professionals, or kind of came to the table and made something really cool that wasn't just NIMBYs attacking everything.
Yeah, I think the three of us share the same sentiment around that, and I think what's interesting is, the longer you stay, the more things become ingrained here, and it means that you don't go back to South Africa with these starry eyes and then all of a sudden you realize, actually it's never going to work there. So there is, for me, a benefit in trying to stick it out here and really understand the policies and the institutional differences. But I definitely have the same approach in terms of wanting to be able to take back my knowledge and apply it to South Africa. And personally, for me, my studies I'll try and frame it around that, so that it allows me to work here and gain some experience, but then also bring it back and have a positive impact there back home. Okay, I think on that note, maybe everyone is starting to get ready for dinner, and we have a lot to think about. But yeah, thanks so much for joining, Azraa and Michael. I really appreciate your insights and your time, and just everyone's questions and interest. I think it's such a nice way of sharing insights and knowledge, and I really would be keen to do it for different cities and different people. So if anyone has ideas of other places that they want to find out more about in the same format, keep the discussion going on the Facebook group, and let's see where we can go with it. And everyone who's planning to move here, good luck. I think it's very exciting, and it would be nice to meet up, actually.
Yeah, let us know if you have any questions or
Yes.
need help with anything.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for organizing. It's really valuable to hear all of this kind of advice, and yeah, thanks for sharing.
Cool.